Okay, so by now you've heard the news. Sean Monahan, former top pick of the Calgary Flames and a superstar in the making, alongside of Johnny Gaudreau, has been traded to the Montreal Canadiens in a very interesting move. The deal goes as follows. Sean Monahan, in a conditional first-round pick, is going over to Montreal for future considerations. Now, if you want to hear my thoughts analyzing the trade, analyzing the player, whatever, then go ahead and watch the two previous videos we made about Monahan and the Canadiens, because those go over my thoughts, talks about the player himself, his entire path, etc., etc. Plus, there is a very in-depth video, The Rise and Fall, I believe it's called, or maybe just The Fall of Sean Monahan, that is also available on this YouTube channel as well. But what this video here focuses on is not Monahan the player, not Monahan the guy, not even Monahan the Canadian. I wanted to talk about the trade itself and just the conditions attached to the first-round pick that the Montreal Canadiens are going to receive alongside of Sean Monahan. Now, we know there's a first-round pick going over to Montreal, but as we highlighted in the video talking about the trade, there are so many gosh darn conditions that, like, even Hans S7 Design went out there and made the Star Wars meme where he had the conditions listed out in the Star Wars intro. It was kind of funny. That clip was actually going viral on Twitter last I saw. But either way, we're going over onto the Canadian subreddit and taking a look at this fantastic post by Lemaszilla, because what they did was they turned the Monahan trade into a slightly easier to follow diagram. Long story short, the Canadiens will end up with a first. Now, if you're a computer programmer, you probably are familiar with diagrams like these. It's a lot of if, then type of thinking. But what this post actually does is it illustrates just how many options the Canadiens have in terms of getting a draft pick as a result of this Monahan trade. Before we go over this, though, we do need to talk about yet another trade because it does kind of set up the Monahan trade nicely. That is the Matthew Tkachuk to Florida Panthers trade, because this is the entire package right there. The Calgary Flames acquired from Florida Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a 2025 conditional first-round pick. The condition on that Florida Panthers first heading over to Calgary goes as follows. Firstly, the pick is lottery protected. If it is a lottery pick that Florida ends up getting in 2025, then they will send over their 2026 first-round pick to Calgary instead. If the 2025 first that Florida sends over to Calgary is a lottery pick, resulting in Calgary receiving Florida's 2026 first-round pick instead, then the 2025 fourth-round pick that Calgary sent over to Florida slides to 2026 too. So that is a very small-ish kind of condition. Hey, Florida sends over a 2025 first. If it's third overall, first overall, or second overall, then okay, Calgary is getting the 2026 Florida Panthers first instead. This information is like the prelude to the Sean Monahan thing, so let's go back over to Lemaszzilla's post and talk about the 2024 draft. Question number 1. In 2024, do the Calgary Flames have a pick between 20 to 32nd overall? If the answer is yes, then Montreal has the choice of getting that pick. If they choose yes, then Montreal gets the Calgary 2024 first. If Montreal does not want Calgary's pick in 2024 from 20 to 32nd, or if Calgary does not have a pick in the first round from 20 to 32nd, then you skip over to the 2025 draft. In 2025, the question is, does Calgary have Florida's 2025 pick? If the answer is yes, the Calgary Flames do have Florida's 2025 pick, meaning that Florida's first-round pick in 2025 was not in the top 3. There then follows another series of questions. Is Calgary's pick in 2025 in the top 10? If the answer is yes, the next step depends on whether or not Florida's pick is in the top 10. Depending on whether it is yes or no, Montreal will receive either of Calgary or Florida's first-round pick in 2025. If Calgary's pick is in the top 10 and Florida's pick is not in the top 10, Montreal will receive the Florida pick from the Tkachuk trade. If both picks are in the top 10, Montreal will receive Calgary's pick. At least that's what the poster here thinks. If Calgary's pick is not in the top 10 and Florida's is, Montreal will receive the Calgary pick. If both picks are outside the top 10, Montreal will receive the earliest pick of Calgary and Florida, meaning that they'll take the pick that is higher up, so the earlier pick. If Calgary does not have Florida's 2025 pick, you also have a conversation as to whether or not Calgary's pick itself is in the top 10. If there is no Florida 2025 pick in Calgary's possession, yet Calgary's own 2025 pick is in the top 10, If Calgary's pick is not the first overall pick, then Montreal will receive that first round pick. So if it's 2nd to 10th overall, Montreal will receive the Calgary first as long as Florida's first is not in Calgary's possession. If Calgary does get the first overall pick in 2025 and Florida's first round pick in that season is not in Calgary possession, Montreal will receive an extra 3rd round pick from the Calgary Flames, as well as the better of the Calgary and Florida 2026 first round picks. Here's another conversation. If Calgary's pick in 2025 is not in the top 10 and they don't have Florida's 2025 pick, then Montreal will receive the Calgary 2025 first. There are some extra conditions dependent on the Florida first. If the Florida first is traded by Florida, not in the top 10, or better than Calgary's first, then Montreal will also receive a 4th round pick. And yeah, this is the entire trade tree right here. I think the way that we went over it, thank you, by the way, to Lemaszilla once again for giving this diagram because it makes things a lot easier to digest. I think the way that we talked about it here in this graph based off of the flowchart, instead of just looking at the paragraphs that were on the NHL's website, I think this is a lot easier to understand because it's like, okay, you just go down the list, you check off the boxes, you see what questions are available there. The options go as follows. Montreal will either receive a Calgary first in 2024, depending on if they choose to do so under the right circumstances. They will either receive the Florida first in 2025 or Calgary's first in 2025, depending on whether or not they are each in the top 10 or which one is earlier or later. And then there's a possibility of the Montreal Canadiens also getting the first from Calgary or Florida in 2026, depending on if Calgary gets the first overall pick in 2025. I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but I think if you've been following the graph, it's a lot easier to sort of follow what it is that I'm saying here, because have we ever seen an NHL trade before with a conditional pick that is this nutty? Like, Sean Monahan and a first for future considerations does not need to be this freaking complicated, dude. How many freaking options do we have here? Okay, let's count it up. Montreal getting the 2024 first from Calgary. Montreal getting the 2025 first from Calgary if Florida's pick is in the top 10 and Calgary's pick is in the top 10. There's Montreal getting the Florida pick with Florida's pick not being in the top 10 and Calgary's pick being in the top 10. There's Montreal getting Calgary's pick when Florida's pick is in the top 10 and Calgary is not. There is Montreal getting the earliest pick of Calgary and Florida if they're both out of the top 10 in 2025. There is the possibility of Montreal getting a 3rd round pick and the best of Calgary and Florida's 2026 first round picks if Calgary gets the first overall pick and Florida does not send their 2025 pick over to Calgary. There is Montreal receiving Calgary's first in 2025 if Calgary does not have the first overall pick and they don't have the Florida 2025 pick either. There are literally like 9 different possibilities as to what's going to happen here in this trade. All depending on top 10s, all depending on whether or not Florida's pick gets sent over to Calgary in the first place. I hate this. I hate this. Maybe this is why the trade call took so freaking long. We had the news that Nazem Kadri was going to sign with Calgary at like 9 a.m. in the morning here in Vancouver, PST, and that same series of news was pressed together with the story of Sean Monahan getting sent over to Montreal. And it wasn't until 3 p.m., 5 hours later, where we actually had the trade details announced and finalized. So it took them 4-5 hours to draft up this entire thing. My gosh, dude, I get you're trying to protect your assets because you don't want to backfire this entire thing because, oh, you gave away Monahan and you want to make sure you're being safe with the way you go throughout the year and everything. But, like, come on, this is so unnecessary. Like, there's a first-round pick going over to Montreal. Just say 2025, 2026, whatever. Like, all these conditions. I hate this. I absolutely hate this. I hope this isn't the start of a bigger trend of more and more conditions added on the draft picks, because if we have to read out every trade like a freaking flowchart from a programmer, like, I do not want to do that. So, talk to the comments on your thoughts about the trade details finally being revealed and just how everything looks on a flowchart like this, I think it's a lot easier to follow, for sure. It's just, I think it's unnecessary that we even have to get to this point, but you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Monahan going over to Montreal. We didn't even talk about the player. We didn't talk about the profile, what he could do with Montreal, and the fact that Kent Hughes wants him to stick around long-term, or he's open to the idea of Monahan sticking around long-term, because I just wanted to focus on the trade return here. But talk to the comments either way, all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. Juraj 99, and bye.